Recording in progress.
Morning, good afternoon, Baba. I'm just checking whether my audio is clear.
Good afternoon. Yes, you are clear.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Very good afternoon, honourable colleagues. It is exactly 12:30. I want us to start our meeting. Mr. Dumizweni, please can you table the agenda, deal with the apologies, and just make sure that we have got a quorum to start our meeting, please.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning to you and honorable members. Chair, so far we do not have the quorum in terms of the members of the committee because of course yourself, Honorable Polwane, and Honorable Peterson. Honorable Whip is joining, is just joining. So yes, we've got we've got about 4 members of the committee, Chair, right now. Unless we can deal with other matters, Chair, like the adoption of the agenda, then for the report, maybe when the time to adopt the report comes, then members will be part or will be here.
Yes, Mvaba. Greetings and good afternoon to the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Social Development, Honourable Masango. I see that she has joined with her Portfolio Committee. A warm welcome to all of you. I do see Honourable Polwane, myself. I do see the Honourable Whip of our committee has joined us. So in the interest of time, may I ask for someone to please move for the adoption of our agenda, which is being flighted. It is the opening and welcome, the adoption of the agenda and the apologies, and then we will go through our stakeholder engagement report on the parliamentary statutory rape inquiry. Please, can I ask for a mover and a seconder?
Chairperson.
Good afternoon, Honourable Polwane.
Yes, afternoon, Chairperson.
Recording in progress.
I move for the adoption of the agenda for today's meeting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Honourable Polwane. Can I take a hand for a seconder, please? It could be any person of our Portfolio Committee or the Portfolio Committee of Social Development. Honourable Peterson.
Thank you so much, Chair. I second the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm sorry if I'm in a little bit of a noisy place. I've just stepped out of a meeting with the Speaker as well as the Commission for Gender Equality. We are still in that meeting, so I've just come down to the Good Hope Chamber, so it might be a little bit noisy, so my apologies for that. Ms. Abrams, can I please hand over to you so that you take us through the report?
Good afternoon, Chairperson, all other chairpersons and members on the platform. Chair, before I proceed, shall we deal with apologies so that we have it for record keeping in the minutes? Thank you.
Yes, my apologies. Mr. Dumizweni, do we have apologies?
Yes, Chair. The only apology that we have received, Chair, in fact, there are 2. Honorable Mbiko is not able to join us due to network issues. She's attending another work in the Eastern Cape, and Honorable Shabangu is with the PC on Health, Chair. So those are the 2 apologies I've received. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Miss, I wanted to check, would the Social Development Portfolio Committee want to table any apologies? Okay, not at this stage.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and the members of the Portfolio Committee from both Portfolio Committees. We have only one portfolio apology from the PC on Social Development, Member Nhlong, who's not with us currently. Otherwise, we are a full complement from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ntsabo, for that. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson and members, today before us we have the interim report. We have very kindly received input from our colleagues that the first thing to consider, Chairperson and members, is the title of the report, that it should actually read Joint Draft Interim Report on Statutory Rape of Young Girls, not Youth Girls. Apologies for that. I will correct immediately. On the portfolio committees on women, youth and persons with disabilities, social development, health and basic education, dated the 26th of November, 2025. Chairperson and members, the introduction outlines the nature of the referral and how that came about, the purpose of the Joint Public Participation Programme. The initial date to report to the House was March 2025. This was subsequently extended, and the request was for the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities to lead, and the report date back to the House, to the National Assembly by the 30th of November 2025. As members and chairpersons have noted, it consisted of two legs, engagement for the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Gauteng and the Eastern Cape Province, with stakeholder engagements in Johannesburg and East London, where we had representatives from the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education attend, as well as Justice, Constitutional Development and Health. Second to that, the committees also had particular engagement across 3 days in Parliament between the 10th and the 12th of November. And noting again, the request was for report back to the House by the 30th of November 2025. With respect to inputs from the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development, and as well as the Portfolio Committee on Police, it was indicated due to these respective committees' responsibilities at the ad hoc committee, they were unable to facilitate stakeholder engagement, but they've rendered their support for this process and indicated that they would continue to ensure that this matter receives attention in 2026. Chairperson, there was a specific request that before we do the purpose, that we highlight specifically that this report is thus a combination of inputs from 4 portfolio committees, namely the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth, Persons with Disabilities, Basic Education, Social Development and Health. So if chairperson and members are fine, I would include one particular sentence just before the purpose to illustrate that. Thank you, Chair. I would include the full names of the relevant committees. The purpose of the stakeholder engagements, just to highlight again, was really to establish the extent of the problem, the nature, understand why mandated reporting was not happening, to ascertain what the key issues are. The intention for the phase 2 would look at the outcome of the phase 1, the report to the House. The resolutions emanating from this process can then help determine and guide what can be taken up in 2026 and the rest of the 7th Parliament. As members and chairpersons are aware, stakeholders were invited to brief the committees on the scale of the problem, outline the issues, not only identify key issues of concern, but also highlight areas of best practice and put forward recommendations. Given the interest of time, Chairperson and members, I will highlight some of the key issues that have emanated both in terms of process and outcomes for observations and recommendations. For participants in stakeholder engagements, in Gauteng, the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth, Persons with Disabilities met several stakeholders. On the first day of the engagement, they engaged with relevant Gauteng departments, provincial departments. On the second day, there was engagements with several select NGOs such as the Teddy Bear Foundation, Johannesburg Child Welfare, Childline, Joburg Parent Child Counselling Centre, Soul City, and Councillor Carol Smith. In the Eastern Cape, a similar process was followed. It included engagements with the relevant provincial departments, SAPS, NPA, as well as the NGOs listed. For the engagement online with child rights experts, NGOs and Chapter 9 on the 10th of November, the Committee of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities was also joined by members of the Portfolio Committee on Justice, Social Development, as well as Education and Health. Amongst others, the committee met and engage with the Human Rights Commission, the CGE, School for Education at UKZN, Centre for Child Law, Dr. Joan van Niekerk, the School of Law, the National Council on Disability, and the South African Child Rights Coalition. With respect to the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, each of these portfolio committees discussed and highlighted under both observations and recommendations. Each adopted their own reports. The observations and recommendations have been included in this interim report. For the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, they met on the 11th of November in the NCOP chamber and met with several key stakeholders, from unions to the Legal Resource Centre, Equal Education, Section 27, to Representative Council for Learners, SACE, as well as the Ministry for Basic Education, Department of Social Development, as well as all the provincial education departments. For the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, they also met on the 12th of November and received a briefing from the Department of Social Development. They had sent the Department of Social Development a set of particular questions for which the department needed to respond. In terms of the presentation, it covered from this Department of Social Development, the legislative framework, strategic planning, an overview of the key matters pertaining to social service professions, as well as training and guidelines pertaining to the Children's Act, the referral mechanisms, turnaround times, the programs rendered, as well as statistics and the impact of the Comprehensive Child Online Protection Program. Furthermore, they noted implementation challenges. With respect to the Portfolio Committee on Health, they also met and had these key stakeholder engagements on the 12th of November. They engaged in specific with the National Department of Health and the South African Medical Research Council. They noted some of the key issues from the Medical Research Council that related to statistics and data management, and provided insights into the prevalence of sexual abuse and statutory rape in terms of the Birth to 30 study, as well as the Optimus study and Sohoho study. In terms of challenges, challenges noted were matters pertaining to underreporting due to stigma and fear of legal repercussions, mandatory reporting laws, limit direct questioning, with challenges that pertain to consent, negative impacts on participants, and data collection. They also highlighted some proposed interventions which linked to data linkages, access to services, prevention programs, and long-term commitment. For the National Department of Health, they highlighted some of the key issues and challenges which pertain to the readiness of designated health facilities, shortages of trained forensic clinicians, inconsistent availability of rape kits, essential medicines, and limited mental health capacity. They highlighted particular matters in relation to statistics and data management, with a focus on 10 to 14-year-olds giving birth, deliveries amongst 15 to 19-year-olds, and then the large discrepancy between the number of minor deliveries and the number of Form 22 reports or SAPS cases pointed to substantial underreporting by health facilities. They also highlighted the legislative framework. In terms of service delivery, the department noted the responsibilities in that regard, as well as the importance of intersectoral collaboration. The Department of Health noted particular challenges, that services are not always available 24 hours, that healthcare worker capacity is limited, and that community engagement remains weak, that youth often lack safe spaces, rolling out of youth zones can improve access to friendly services, and another key issue is the data inaccuracy, which was inconsistent. Department of Health also provided some proposed interventions, which included expand prevention and community education, strengthening mandatory reporting compliance, strengthening support services, improving data and case management, enhancing intersectoral coordination. Chairperson and members, the observations are quite substantive. I will highlight some of the key issues that had emanated from the engagements the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities noted in terms of the engagements, both Johannesburg, East London, as well as on the virtual platforms. I think in summary, the discussions across all the stakeholder engagements focus on the fragmented and often ineffective response to statutory rape and gender-based violence across various government departments. Key themes included a severe lack of interdepartment collaboration, insufficient resources for social development and police, systemic failures in the justice process, and a significant gap between policies on paper and reality on the ground. While departments presented numerous programs, members of the committees expressed deep skepticism about the actual impact, citing low reporting rates, case withdrawals, and a lack of support for victims. Major recommendations included a centralized Office of the Rights of Children to enforce coordination, creating a unified data system, and increasing resources for frontline services. In terms of general issues, again, the consistent theme that emerged, that is statutory rape is not limited to girls. The inclusion of the boy child was extremely important. General issues were also around concern related to matters pertaining to violence against women and girls, teen pregnancy, the lack of awareness around reporting, that despite mandatory reporting laws, schools and health facilities often fail to comply due to lack of training, fear of legal consequences and reputational damage. Matters pertaining to bullying was noted, the increase seen in technology-facilitated harm, the overall lack of understanding about the legal duty or consequences of non-reporting, no whistleblower protection, that victims often face secondary trauma, and other concerns were also noted around Ukutwala in Teyo. Other key observations that came about related to societal norms, cultural and societal barriers, which link to poverty and cultural practices which are used to justify or conceal abuse. Overall underreporting and systemic failures, that many cases of statutory rape go unreported due to fear, stigma, and lack of clear procedures. Particular matters were noted around schools and clinics and police often failing to act on disclosure of signs of abuse, that parents and caregivers do not provide case numbers and most schools do not follow up. Concerns were also noted about the awareness of independent schools, overall issues pertaining to statistics and data management, that high rates of sexual violence amongst young boys and girls, that there are high prevalence rates of statutory rape among learners with special needs, that data is collected independently by various government departments. Apologies. The verified statistics cannot be provided according to Gauteng Department of Education. There was a lack of internal reporting in terms of standard operating procedures and data collection. Overall, the lack of integrated interdepartmental reporting web-based tool was highlighted. Overall, poor disaggregation of data, and the statistics are incongruent between government and NGOs. Other issues noted was around policy and law reform, that South Africa has a robust legal framework to protect children from sexual offences, which is anchored in the Children's Act and sexual offences, but implementation remains weak. That there's confusion that persists between the various statutes, that the statutory rape term is clearly defined, however, its interpretation appears to be limited. That stakeholders noted a perceived conflict between confidentiality to the victim and legal obligation, and that the NSP was heavily adult-focused with an insufficient focus on children, and that police stations sometimes refuse to accept reports from educators or children, insisting that parents must report, even when the parent is the perpetrator. Overall, lack of mechanisms to deal with withdrawal of cases and prosecution in this regard. In terms of service delivery, that this is often fragmented, poor communication and lack of follow-up from DSD, that teenage pregnancies are often the only indicator of statutory rape, the pervasive failure to complete Form 22, and for Form 22 is completed, the corresponding Form 23 is far less in comparison. The lack of multidisciplinary teams and trauma-informed care. Schools are not adequately resourced, that sexual reproductive health not implemented, and the overall failure of SAPs when victim and or their families reach police stations. Officers are often unhelpful, try to mediate or discourage them from opening cases. Overall, there was a lack of interdepartmental collaboration, which has been expanded on, inadequate reporting mechanisms. With respect to victim support gaps, the victim empowerment rooms at police stations are often misused or inaccessible. With respect to accountability, staff at the TCCs have unclear and conflicting lines of accountability, with different personnel reporting to GST, the Department of Health, and the MPA. No interdepartmental accountability for underage pregnancies, no consequence management for failure to report. With respect to the resource constraints, they were under funding as well as human resources, and that NGOs rely heavily on donor funding and government support is insufficient. Again, most NGOs noted the concerns around the cut to the PEPFAR funding. In terms of human resource constraints, it was noted that the human resource capacity to deal with statutory rape cases remains limited, and that teachers and healthcare workers lack training and fear backlash, that departments, especially social development and health, are under-resourced. In terms of training and capacity building, frontline workers, including police officers, social workers, teachers, healthcare providers, often lack adequate training and support to identify and respond appropriately to abuse. For the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, they had engaged, as noted before, with several key stakeholders, which included SATU, and SATU provided some statistics as well in terms of sexual offences. Educators reported to SACE from between 2019 to 2022. FedSAS had also provided some input and highlighted matters pertaining to service delivery and key issues that the responsibilities detailed were not education and consideration. Teachers were not child protection specialists. Some of the key issues noted include that principals and GSBs are guided in the process from the beginning, that learners are engaged with appropriately and safely with the access to education and not disrupted, and that there is coordination between SAPs, DSD, and families. NAPTOSA also provided some useful insight and highlighted key issues which related to inadequate training, weak reporting mechanisms, lack of cooperation, NATU provided some statistics as well as highlighted some key issues. SAOU also again highlighted some key issues of concern. Inputs were also received from the Legal Resource Centre, as well as Equal Education Law Centre, as well as COSAS, Equal Education, and Section 27. Noting the challenges with reporting around systemic and institutional barriers, cultural and social factors, resource constraints, legal and procedural challenges, and school-level obstacles. The Centre for Child Law also provided some input and indicated that the failure of mandatory reporting was not necessarily legislative, but rather operational, and it manifested in 4 ways: that teachers do not know the law, the reporting system is broken, and that zero enforcement despite severe penalties and institutional protection of perpetrators. Input was also received from the Representative Council for Learners, as well as South African Council for Educators, that highlighted matters pertaining to vetting, and noted the prevalence of sexual conduct cases between 2019 and 2025. It also outlined and contextualized the number of cases reported per province. For inputs received from the Department of Basic Education, Education highlighted some of the key challenges related to parental interference by the perpetrators, refusal by the relevant authorities to prosecute, legislative gaps, and the like. In terms of inputs received by Basic Education from Social Development noted impediments to mandatory reporting, which included mandatory reporting was not happening in school because some teachers did not want to be involved in protracted court cases, being summoned to be witnesses. That some parents were not reporting because perpetrator paid damages to conceal abuse. And again, this was a consistent issue that emerged both in Johannesburg and East London for the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Disabilities. The Portfolio Committee on Basic Education received substantive inputs from the inland provincial departments, Gauteng, Free State, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Northwest, as well as the coastal departments of education, which and some of the key themes that emanated related to legal alignment and implementation gaps, underreporting as a national crisis, cultural and dynamics and patriarchy, as well as services and prevention. All provinces describe psychosocial support teams, implementation, partnerships with NGOs, and referral to DST and SAPS. But gaps persist, that Free State and Limpopo lack detail on service reach, and that Gauteng and Mpumalanga emphasize multi-sectoral coordination. Accountability and consequence management was also noted, with disciplinary consequences were inconsistent. They also highlighted matters pertaining to data monitoring and reporting system and thematic rights-based interpretation. The inland provincial submissions portray a commitment to combating statutory rape through a strong legislative base, but struggling with persistent socio-cultural and institutional barriers. Across provinces, statutory rape was predominantly a failure of systemic capacity, community awareness, institutional accountability, and cultural transformation. As noted previously, the coastal provincial education departments also presented to the PC on basic education, namely Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Northern Cape, and the Western Cape. And they provided details in that regard in terms of statistics and pregnancy in young adolescents. In terms of comparative observations across the provinces, 3 trends emerge. High underreporting was consistent, especially in rural districts. Educators as perpetrators remained a recurring pattern, highlighting power dynamics and institutional vulnerabilities. Dropout associated risk. Many victims disengaged from school before disclosure, hampering reporting, and academic research supported these findings. Furthermore, impediments to mandatory reporting was also noted in terms of individual, family-level barriers, school-level barriers, as well as systemic institutional barriers. The cross-provincial challenges related to underreporting, educators as perpetrators, weak referral mechanisms, social-cultural norms, and resource constraints. Summary of the findings from PC Basic Education. There are persistent challenges that impede implementation of mandatory reporting insofar as grading coordination gaps, parental resistance, and enforcement weaknesses continue to hinder justice and learner protection. Furthermore, in terms of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, some of the key observations and findings were that child sexual abuse in a broader sense is a national crisis. There's a lot of work that's been done by various departments. There's an unclear budget allocation and expenditure on child protection services, including funding of NGO rendering child protection services. That there's a contradiction on legislative age of majority, which is 18 as provided in the Children's Act, but yet the Termination of Pregnancy Act. Furthermore, there's a lack of training of police, a critical shortage of social service professionals, in particular social workers. The focus on statutory rape has been mainly on girls, even though statistics indicate high cases of sexual abuse against boys. This too was a finding from the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. The laws of the country prioritize the best interests of the child, but this is not realized when the country has a crisis of sexual abuse of children, which has a long-term impact. For the Portfolio Committee on Health, in terms of the Medical Research Council and the observations noted in engaging with the Department of Health, the committee highlighted the need for age disaggregated data. It was concerned that only 10% of reported cases result in convictions, highlighting again the clarity on the adequacy and accessibility of mental health, strategies to address persistent underreporting of health facilities in schools, matters pertaining to data, collaboration, analyzing causal factors, as well as gaps in mandatory reporting, deficiencies in training, concerns about cultural norms, matters pertaining to standardized protocol for reporting, and the accessibility of TCCs. Chairperson and members, as we conclude and highlight some of the recommendations that emanated from the stakeholder engagement for the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, there were general recommendations, again, highlighting that boys and young men, apologies there, that there should be a focus that include boys and young men, as well as children with disabilities and children with special needs. Again, around statistics and data management, there's a need for segregated data reporting, focusing on children, that's all persons under the age of 18, a need for centralized database, ensuring monitoring dashboards, holding departments to account, need for child protection indicators, improving monitoring and evaluation using triangulated data systems, integrated referral pathways. With respect to the policy and law reform, strong enforcement of existing laws, legislating care standards, addressing the loopholes, particular recommendations around the Children's Act and the Sexual Offences Related Matters Act in terms of education, needing for particular protocols, to expand the legal definition. There was a need to align the sexual offences with the GBVF National Strategic Plan to include digital offences, to clarify mandatory reporting thresholds, to consolidate the duty to report for all professionals. In terms of government structures, I think one of the key things was the call for the establishment of the Office on the Rights of the Child within the Office of the Premier, CPO establishments, in terms of the role of municipalities played, and with respect to policy, the standardized child-friendly procedure limits, ensuring triangulation framework for service delivery, to create an anonymous online reporting platform for teachers, social workers, and community members, standardized referral pathways, implementing a 24/72/7 model, focusing on removing the burden on health officials are having to transport victims to police stations, evidence-based group interventions to focus on young men, again, victim support and transportation, social workers to be stationed at police stations on a full-time basis, scholar transport, parent interventions, youth-friendly services, and edutainment campaigns. Recommendations also noted around improving reporting mechanisms, collaboration, public education and community engagement, strengthening accountability, resource allocation, again around TCCs and school-based child protection desks, increasing FCS and forensic staffing, dedicated budget lines for child protection within departmental plans, training and capacity building, with particular emphasis also on the need to support additional leaders, and training should be done with all key stakeholders concerned, scaling up teacher programs on Children's Act. A call to action was around strengthening interdepartmental collaboration, expanding human resource and support services, standardized reporting referral mechanisms, training and capacity building, community engagement, policy and law reform, and a shift from only rights-based to rights and responsibility with the emphasis on the latter. For the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, the recommendations were received from SATU, FEDSAS, NATU, SAOU, the Legal Resource Centre, Equal Education, COSAS, Equal Education, Section 27, Centre for Child Law, the RCL, SACE, DSD, as well as the provincial departments, inland and coastal. The main priority actions identified were strengthening prevention and sexuality education, improving reporting and accountability, enhancing interdepartmental and community collaboration, effective data and early intervention, and vetting all personnel. The PC on Basic Education also had particular recommendations, resolutions, which related to strengthened legal enforcement, multi-sectoral data integration, socioeconomic interventions, cultural transformation, capacity building and funding, SACE, as well as specific recommendations that pertain to vetting within the Department of Education, oversight and monitoring, evidence-based community intervention programs, coordination, and consideration be given to a national task team to report directly to Parliament on a quarterly basis, addressing the shortage of social workers, mandatory annual training for educators, prosecution and public accountability, collaboration, a joint committee task team to be established and tasked to consolidate the scope of the referrals. And then for the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, some of the recommendations was government departments through DSD should develop a reporting tool that will provide daily statistics on reported cases of child sexual abuse, as well as general cases of GBVF. That DSD should develop a protocol, that government departments through DSD should develop an integrated online confidential reporting system, that other relevant departments should collaborate with academia, civil society and Chapter 9s. There was a need for alignment of the legislative provisions of the Children's Act and the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act, and that DSD and police should develop a policy provisions on follow-ups on the sexual abuse cases that are withdrawn. Amongst others, that the DSD should engage with the Department of Trade and Industry and develop a policy that will mandate mining industry and other businesses to allocate a certain percentage to fund the employment of social service professionals in the sector. that DSC should involve traditional leaders, and there is a need for joint engagement with all relevant portfolio committees and stakeholders on issues that emanated from the public participation program. And then with respect to the Portfolio Committee on Health, they had recommendations pertaining to data quality report and use, as well as strengthening health sector support for survivors, improving mandatory reporting and addressing underreporting, prevention and addressing drivers of statutory rape, interdepartmental coordination, the need for the Law Reform Commission to review the relevant legislation to ensure that certain matters are addressed through community-based and restorative approaches, and criminalization, this may not be the most effective response. That in terms of parliamentary oversight, a national system should be established to enable regular reporting cycles to Parliament on statutory rape, undertake joint oversight visits, enforcement and accountability, and staffing for prevention and response. Chairpersons and members, as I conclude, in terms of resolutions, a joint meeting of committees concerned be convened once all committees, including justice, I would need to indicate, and police, have concluded the engagements to consider and agree on the final set of recommendations to be submitted to the House by 31 March 2026. Portfolio committees continue their work on this matter in 2026, and the scope of the inquiry be expanded to include and boys and not limited to young girls. Chairperson and members, in conclusion, the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, having concluded its work as lead committee on the statutory rape inquiry, hereby thanks all committees and stakeholders for their hard work and contributions, which has translated into the development of this interim report. The multiple stakeholder engagements have yielded important findings and proposed numerous recommendations, which serve as the basis for future work in 2026 and the rest of the 7th Parliament. Chairperson and members, I thank you. That concludes the interim report.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abrams. We really appreciate you taking us through this report. Honourable colleagues, may I ask then if there are any questions for clarity or any inputs from both portfolio committees? You can raise your hands if there are any issues that you would like to comment on or ask any questions. Honourable Masango. Followed
Thank
by
you.
Yeah, sorry, Honourable Masango, our chairperson, hang on. I'm just it's Honourable Masango, followed by the Honourable Chauke Aduanis. Can I see if there are any further hands?
There is a hand of the Honourable Mare.
Honourable Mare as well, okay.
And the hand of the Honourable Munyai.
Munyai, okay. Chairperson, you can lead, and then we will take it in that order. Honourable Chauke Aduanis, Honourable Mare, and Munyai. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity. My one issue that I am saying I would like clarity on after all this great work has been done is that the what I believe to be the key committees, that is the police and the justice, we know that they could not do this work because they are in the ad hoc committee. So I'm asking if submitting this report because of the deadlines that we have to do this work, does it make the report complete? I don't know. That's the only name I can come up with, because I mean there is a whole lot of work that has been done here, and it would complete it. I was just listening as Ms. Abrams was going through that there are things that are raised in this report that had the justice and the police portfolio committees had time to do their work. These questions or these points that are being raised here would have been responded to. I don't know if I make sense, Chairperson, but that is my question. I will now hand over to the Honourable, with your permission, Honourable Chair, to the Honourable Mare.
Thank you, Chair. Before you hand over to the Honourable Mare, I would like to say that I believe the interim report to be almost 90% complete, in that the Portfolio Committee of Social Development, Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Health and Basic Education has completed their work. My understanding is that in my discussions with the Honourable House Chairperson, that we will allow an opportunity in the new year for police and justice then to convene their meetings. I think we should expand it in that they could possibly look at identifying 2 days where this interim report will be tabled. Some of the issues that arise here pertaining to justice and police must then be teased out in that meeting, apart from them engaging on the topic. And thereafter, they will then give their proposals and inputs, and then that will form part of the final report that will go to the National Assembly. So that is how I understand the process to unfold in the new year, because again, the deadline that we are proposing is for the end of March for them to complete their work. So I would say this is 90% complete. Then we await them to play their role. I'm hoping that it will also be a session where maybe they can have 2 days and it will be a joint meeting. They invite us and we also get an opportunity to engage with justice and police, and also put the issues on the table, and then take it from there in terms of their resolutions to be inputted into this report, and then we submit the final report, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honourable Mare?
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I just want to make a proposal. You're going to bring the SAPs and you're going to bring justice on board. I was thinking that you should basically have a discussion with Department of Transport, Road and Transport, because on a daily basis, our children are taking scholar transport going to school, from creche to high school. And a lot of these young drivers is afterwards having a relationship with these high school children, even the ones of primary school, you know. So because I'm speaking about this because I know this, Chairperson, and these young girls gallivanting with the driver sometimes for the whole day without the parents even knowing they didn't go to school, and even after school. So that is one thing we might have to look into, because that is where a lot of dangers also lie, because we entrust the drivers with our children 5 o'clock in the morning. The children come home around about 4 o'clock because it is a long distance for these children to drive. So there's also a lot of dangers in that. So if we can have maybe a discussion with Department of Trade, they might just call all the taxi to transport, scholar transport together from different provinces, and then have a discussion with them, because they also should know what is the dangers of these young men that is driving these young girls around, because girls are impressed because you're driving up and down, they're buying them KFC, you know, doing all these little things just to impress these little girls. So that is also a thing that we need to look at, and that is where the rape is coming in, but the children is not talking, because this guy has been doing them favors, driving up and down and all these things. So this is one thing that we have to look in, Chairperson. And I'm talking about, because I know I've experienced this thing of one cousin of mine that was driving up and down without the mother knowing about it. And then just a clarity around this one, Chairperson, is that you said parents must report even though the parents are the perpetrators. I would like to know how we're going to go around that, because if the parent is the perpetrator, how is he going to report himself? You know, it's like the judge being the jury and everything in one. So that is just something that we have to look into, because there's no ways the child must be able to go to anyone, the teacher, the principal, even the person at church, to say, look here, this is what my parent is doing to me, and give the child the ear to listen. Because if a parent is a perpetrator, there's no way the parent is going to go and give himself over to the police to say, I'm the perpetrator of what is happening in my house. And if you look at what is happening in the house, because the mother is unemployed, the father is the one that is bringing the food to the table, the mother's keeping quiet. So sometimes the neighbors knows about this, but because the neighbors cannot speak, because the parents are now saying, this is my child and no one is going to do anything with my child. I'm the one in charge of this child. So we have to look at that one as well, Chairperson. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Mare. I think you're raising a very important point. I think throughout the discussions we heard a lot about an anonymous or a confidential reporting platform that should be created that will allow neighbors to be able to lodge a complaint or a case on that online platform, and it will be then easier for people who are either neighbors or other family members to be able to report cases on this anonymous or confidential platform. So it's something that we must look into. We can definitely also include in the February, March engagements next year, the Department of Transport. In fact, I think the Honourable Whip that will speak later informed me of a case in Acacia Park where a child was violated by a taxi operator, and they had to intervene because that child was actually going to the Acacia Park Primary School there. So thank you for those inputs and points. But I think in terms of, I think also a discussion was had when we were in your portfolio committee meeting. We also need to ensure that platforms where children are able to access help, like the Childline platforms and other toll-free call centers, are advertised to a point where children know exactly where they can go to get help if they need that help. But I think we would need to strengthen those recommendations in the final report. Honourable Munyai.
Thank you very much, esteemed Honourable Chair, Joint Chairpersons, and Honourable Members. You know, I don't know at what angle are you looking at these issues with respect to report, because I would not, I'm not convinced rather, or persuaded that the report will account for 90%. Without the police, without justice, and without the basic education, because as you know, that the issue of the basic education, not basic education, early whole child development, has been mandated by the presidency to the basic education to deal with it. I'm saying they have early childhood centers that is within the Department of Basic Education. So I'm saying I would want to argue, Chair, that the basic education is also at the core of these issues, and we can't allow them to escape to participate in this report, because they're the biggest constituency in the CD, childhood development centers. So that, in my view, I would argue that the report accounts for 50%, because we can't allow those that are custodian of the early childhood development centers to escape the responsibility to respond to these critical issues that are affecting our children. And equally, I would also argue that because it seems everything have to come to social, and I think issues of the GBV command centers, as you mentioned it, that the reporting of these statutory rape cases must also be directed to social development. I would also want to further argue that the justice cluster, the security cluster, which include Department of Justice, and as well as the police and so forth. I think they must also streamline, to have that capacity, because once this, as part of the contingency, because there could be a way in which this report could be streamlined when they come to the center that relates to social development. We can say all social cluster, social development related, can come to the command center that's under the social development. But it does not mean that the justice cluster can escape the responsibility to begin to have something. Because police will play a critical role once we recommend reporting within 24 hours, 48 hours. So that responsibility, but I'll also argue that some of the issues that we have listed equally would have been clarified either by education, either basic education, either by justice or police. And so its conclusion for this report ought to be argued to be 90% with some clarity that would have obtained. It doesn't assist the process. To me, it's a rush process because this process was supposed to have been concluded early March this year. And we know the reason why we're late, GNU and so on and other issues that postpone even the budget itself. So all I'm trying to say, Chair, those are the critical issues that I think you need to look into it. By the way, there's a children in every department. Streamlining is critical across interdepartment. That would be my last recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Munyai. I think your inputs are appreciated and we do value them. I want to make the point that this is just an interim report. It's an interim report to report back to Parliament to say this is the work that we've done to meet your 30 November deadline. Has it been a rushed process? Yes, it has been a rushed process. My portfolio committee was brought in at the very tail end of this process and asked to drive this process. And yes, of course, the report is not final. It does, Honourable Munyai, include the recommendations and work done by the Basic Education Portfolio Committee. They, in fact, had a full day, a very long day from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock in the evening in the NCOP chamber. But I think I hear what you are saying, that more work must be done, and especially that we need to put a greater focus on the justice cluster. And I think once we have submitted this interim report to the National Assembly, it is simply us reporting back to say, A, we have done the work, B, more work must be done, C, this is what we have unearthed so far, and D, we are now passing the ball to the justice cluster to continue the work. Thereafter, I think we will, as per the recommendations, we will all again meet as joint committees to further tease out the exact recommendations that we would want to put on the table. So yes, it has been a rush process because we all had our fourth term program already in place and we had to fit this work into our programs that were already existing. But I can give you the assurance that this is just an interim report. More work will be done. Resolutions will be streamlined. We will have a greater focus, or we'll make sure that police and justice play their role in the new year, and that we then refine the recommendations in a joint meeting before we finalize the final report. So I hope that is okay in terms of a response. Honourable Chauke Adonis.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, through you, if you may allow me to keep my camera off.
Yes, ma'am, that's fine.
Thank you very much, and greetings to yourself and to the co-chairpersons and all honorable members on the platform, our support team, and those who are joining us on various platforms. Chairperson, I would like to start off by appreciating the report that was presented before us, which has consolidated the ones that we have received from other portfolio committees. And I think I would like to also just agree with the previous speaker in terms of ensuring that these two institutions or departments, such as police and justice, must make quite critical inputs into the report. And I'm glad that you've answered one of the questions that I had, that this is an interim report. Basically, this is a working report that we will then be presenting, that will be further developed for us to end up with a consolidated report which will fall into the next year. Chairperson, I think what is on the report that was given to us, I think it mentioned that we're having a problem with the teachers following up with cases. I think perhaps there would be a correction as well. it was an indication that teachers or educators and schools are unable to do a follow-up on cases that have been reported. So I think that perhaps must find expression if perhaps there was an error in it. The concern was that the educators are unable to do a follow-up on cases that have been opened regarding statutory rape. There are limitations there. Secondly, Chairperson, I think what must be re-emphasized here, and I saw it in the report, is the legislative reform and perhaps amending some of the legislations in order for them to really be more cohesive. And I think that's the greatest challenge that we're currently having. Apart from cross-interdepartmental collaboration, stakeholder, participation, we're having an issue where we've got legislations that are contradicting one another. And I think this must be, quite clearly stipulated within this report as well and highlighted that and I think it was highlighted there was a view, sorry, Chairperson, where it indicated some of the legislation where there's a misalignment. But I think we need to further probe where there is further misalignment, not only in acts, but also within policies and within municipalities. And I think that's quite important for us to really review. If it says that there's mandatory reporting, and therefore it means there must be further and heightened increased visibility and awareness that is raised, and also there must be consequence management that is put in place. And I think one of the things that we had put forward, Chairperson, was that how do we ensure that when there is no reporting from either the public servants, educators, your doctors, nurses, etc., when there are evidence or there might be evidence of neglect, abuse, statutory rape, etc., but they fail to report, what then is the recommendation of the justice cluster in terms of legislative reform that needs to take place in order for us to really ensure that those who encounter these young these minors who are victims understand that they have an obligation and a responsibility, because this is not only put at a legislative point of view, it's within the Constitution, and therefore mandatory reporting is there. And there must be an understanding and a principle that is put in place so that consequences are put in place there. Also, Chairperson, I agree in terms of the scholar transport, and perhaps, with our investigations and our engagements, we will further expand the various stakeholders and departments that we are to engage with. And I'm glad that we will be engaging with the Department of Transport. But even with that, is how does the basic education regulate the scholar transport that's privatized? And I think that's where we are having the biggest challenge, not the ones that are government operated and employed, but we're having the greatest challenge where it is the private scholar transport that are unregulated. And perhaps we should start looking at making recommendations on reviewing regulations within basic education, whether it comes to transport and scholar transport within the private sector. And I think second to last, Chairperson, we re-emphasized the importance of Department of Social Development and all other departments who have been mandated to absorb social workers. And I think this must be strongly put in this report, that it is a reminder that all departments have been mandated to absorb social workers, and therefore it is a collective responsibility that must be undertaken by all ministers and deputy ministers, officials in this regard. And I think one of the last thing that I want to put here, Chairperson, is that re-emphasizing on the vulnerable groups. And I think I do appreciate the report and the input that you have made as well, is that we have not paid particular attention to the special needs schools, where we're seeing high rates of statutory rape and neglect and abuse that is taking place, but additionally underreporting. And I think it also goes back to the the request that we had made for the publication of the sexual offenders register. And I think this lies with the department and the portfolio committee of justice. Where are we with that in that regard? But also it must be segregated so that we understand when we're speaking about sexual offenders, what sexual offenders are they? Which ones are offenders of minors? So that it's easier for educators or schools to pick it up, which schools did indicate that they have a backlog and a challenge, and therefore we find those who are perpetrators really falling through the cracks and undetected and becoming educators to our learners. So overall, Chairperson, yes, our report is incomplete. It is a supplementary and interim report, but it is a quite informative report and really reflects the work that has been done within a short period of time. And I do hope that even in our next year, the second stage of this process, we further probe and investigate in areas, in communities, in rural and township communities where we are seeing that they are the most affected when it comes to statutory rape and high rates of teenage pregnancy as well. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much to you, Honourable Chauke Aduenes. We really appreciate those inputs. Yes, colleagues, as we've said, this is only the interim report. It is the report for us to be able to table something to the House in order to meet the 30 November deadline. It is for us to be able to report back to the House on the work that we have done so far. In the new year, we then pass this interim report to the Portfolio Committee of Police and Justice. We will expect them then to lead this process, to include us in the process. We will also be able to add issues such as the scholar transport issues. Thereafter, we will, as a joint committees, we will come up with the final resolutions. Some of those final resolutions will look at legislative reform. It will look at strengthening mandatory reporting. It will have a resolution on the employment of social workers, where we ask the question why the 2018 cabinet resolution for various portfolio committees to employ social workers have not been adhered to. Those are just some of the resolutions I think that we will finally put on the table when we report back to the House early in March. But Ms. Abrams, do you want to add anything?
Chairperson, thank you. Just to highlight, the matter of scholar transport has been picked up. I think PC Basic Education picked it up in terms of the observations for the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. We noted that as a concern, as well as a recommendation that emanated around the vetting of scholar transport. The concern around children with disabilities and children with special needs was also highlighted as a key issue of concern, and the need for disaggregated data, and as well as a recommendation to ensure that there's specific emphasis placed on children with special needs, children with disabilities, as well as the boy child. So many of the issues which members have raised are contained in the very detailed interim report, Chairperson. Thank you.
Colleagues, I would then like to ask whether you are willing to adopt this interim report. I would need a mover and a seconder. We will then, Honourable Masango.
Chairperson and colleagues, I would like to move for the adoption of the interim report.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Please, may I take a seconder?
Chairperson.
Honourable Chauke Aduenes.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and apologies, I'm unable to raise my hand. I hereby second the adoption of this report.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, let me take this opportunity to thank the Portfolio Committee of Social Development, Chairperson Masango, your support team for your hard work. I would also like to thank the other chairpersons of Basic Education and Health that participated in the program and that joined us on our visits to Gauteng and East London. I would also like to thank the support team of the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. I know you worked really long hours. You put in a lot of time and effort to help us get to this point of having an interim report. Colleagues, we will then submit this to the National Assembly after today's meeting, and we will then convene again in the new year, continue the work. But I would like to thank all of you for the work that you've done in the service of our nation, but in particular stepping up to protect the rights of young girls. I think all of us would agree that there is really a crisis that is facing us in terms of statutory rape of young girls, and the fact that it's clear that the system that is meant to protect them are failing them. So colleagues, thank you so much. We will deposit this report this week, and we will continue the work in the new year. And thank you for your individual contributions and your hard work. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Long live the chairs.
Bye. Long live the chair.
Thank you.
Long live the chair. Don't long live the chair. And
Thank you, Mama Fisani.